Hello and welcome to the Left Wing Podcast. Will Slattery here with you. Today we'll be reflecting on Ireland's disappointing defeat to France at the Aviva Stadium on Saturday, where Fabien Galtier's side delivered a statement victory as they took control of their Six Nations destiny. I'm delighted to be joined by Luke Fitzgerald and Jonathan Bradley for our chat today, and there's plenty to get into. Jonathan, we had John obviously for our preview last week, and you know, one of the things we touched on was the notion that France were coming kind of like a last chance saloon kind of vibe. I made the comparison to England in 2003 coming to the Lansdowne Road, and they actually got the same amount of points in the end, 42 points on both occasions. And it really was an emphatic statement from Fabien Galtier's side. Obviously, the first 45 minutes was an arm wrestle. Ireland take the lead at 13-8. You're thinking, without Antoine Dupont, who suffered that awful injury in the first half, it might be a time for Ireland to kick on. But what we saw over the next 20-25 minutes or so was a kind of a full court press. It was power from the bench replacements. It was unbelievable skill by the back three and Penaud and Louis Bilbire, and it ended up with Ireland getting a very chastening defeat. How do you reflect on it all? Because it was kind of like a game within a game. It took on a life of its own in the second half.
Yeah, absolutely. It felt like, really, I suppose, two or possibly even three completely different games, because you have the start that Ireland made and it felt very similar to the start that they made against Scotland, and even the start that they made against Wales, where they sort of flew out of the traps and Wales then chased them back. But Ireland made such a good start to their past two games in this championship. And it felt like that again, with the only difference being that they hadn't scored. And the way that France defended during that opening period was so impressive. The way that they got so narrow on the Irish breakdown, disrupted the ruck so much, slowed Ireland ball down, and then just backed the defenders to make the right decisions on the edges. But even when that was happening over that first sort of 20 minutes, half an hour, you still felt like Ireland were going to score eventually. Like they had the Caelan Doris being held up, they had the Dan Sheehan tap and go, but you felt like a try was coming. The Prendergast miss obviously was very deflating at the time for Ireland, because it meant that they had 0 points rather than just what would have been 3 for all their dominance early on. But whenever Ireland scored the try in the second half, because we'd seen them do this against Australia, we'd seen them do this against England, we'd seen them do this against Wales, where they were behind at half time and just kicked on. Whenever Dan Sheehan scored that try, I just assumed that that was the way that the game was going to play it, especially when Antoine Dupont was already off the pitch. So we talked about it last week in the 7-1 split, but the absolute doomsday scenario obviously was that they ended up with backline injuries, and one of them is the best player in the world. So at that point, you're thinking that Ireland are going to go on and win. And then you have this half-hour display of utter dominance from France that just had you leaving the stadium thinking that France are demonstrably the better team. And over the past 4 years, when these two sides have been the best sides in this competition, I don't think, even whenever Ireland were playing in Marseille against 14 men, I don't think we've ever seen a period of half an hour where one team has looked so vastly superior to the other.
It's been a while since we've seen Ireland, as you say, kind of taken to the cleaners like that. You're maybe going back to the first test into 2022 against the All Blacks, where I think Ireland were 5-0 ahead and then it went to 28-5 in the blink of an eye. And you mentioned the 7-1 split there. It's funny, like all the kind of qualms we raised about it last week pretty much did come to pass. You had Oscar Jegu, a flanker, moved to the centre in the second half after that high tackle by Calvin Nash. But to be fair, he actually played really well there. It obviously wasn't it's not like just like I drew it up, as Fabien Galtier might say afterwards, but it didn't weaken them in any way, which might be slightly fortuitous, but it didn't. And the forwards they did bring on were unbelievably destructive. Luke, how do you reflect on the Ireland defeat? Obviously, that period after the Dan Sheehan try was when France punished Ireland, made them pay, were very clinical, powerful, and all that. But were the seeds sown in that first half when Ireland had so much ball, had so much territory, so much possession, and didn't score? Probably took up a lot of energy to kind of have that much ball and be like running into that blue wall, again and again. And then obviously getting those yellow cards didn't help either. France made them pay there. Like what can you do? What kind of piece of the game do you point to as being the most decisive?
Sorry, there's a few questions there along the way. Uh, Look, I felt throughout the game that I didn't think Ireland didn't think their body height was great. I thought there was a lot of times where the French guys just looked, that to my mind, that's always a bit of a sense of like who's a bit more urgent, who's more switched on. Like Ireland got kind of pushed around at one or two rucks. I thought the French were very good there. If you think about the tackling, there was a lot of tackles where the French player got underneath an Irish player and drove them back a few yards. The obvious one was the Prendergast one, but there was a lot of other ones where they just looked really switched on. Their technique was brilliant. And to my mind, it was probably the physicality where they really lost the game. And, you know, just overall, my impressions were that I think Ireland might have a little bit of a discipline issue that they need to get resolved. There was I thought they got away with a few ones. I thought there was a few kind of situations where there was kind of looked like there was no arm tackles, no arm kind of collisions, awkward ones that could have easily been a yellow card as well. I thought we were a little bit lucky on the Nash one where it looked to me like it was a Henshaw in the side as well at the same time. It was in the collision. He looked like he was kind of high as well. Now I think that probably the right thing ended up happening, but I don't know. I thought Ireland just looked a little bit loose. I did think their body height was great at the contact. I thought France were really good though, and to Jonathan's point about no team really blowing out another team over the course of this kind of rivalry, most of the big, like I think what France didn't do in the weekend is they didn't make any kind of rash, stupid, decisions around. Well, they didn't make that many anyway. They didn't get a red card. They didn't give away, reams of penalties in a row. They were just quite disciplined, I think, which is, probably the key thing for this French team. So that if they're switched on, which I thought you could easily see from the physicality stakes and their body height, and they didn't make any kind of big glaring, red card kind of type errors, yellow card type errors. They're bloody hard to beat, And like I thought they were the best side at the World Cup last year. I thought they were going to win a pre-competition, but they had a few brain farts against South Africa, if you remember. So I think this is a brilliant French team. And even England a couple of weeks ago, like think about how like that is the biggest challenge for this French team is whether they can kind of be mentally at the top of their game. If they're mentally, if they don't make any of those kind of big errors, they're an unbelievable side, guys. The power they have, the quality they have. I think the pace they have as well. They've got everything that you need. Skills are unbelievable. Like I thought their pack, some of the offloading was really, really top quality as well. They exposed Ireland like a lot. So yeah, look, there's a jumble of thoughts there. Like there was a lot of things. It wasn't just one thing that contributed to the Irish loss, but there's a few thoughts that I had on key areas, and France really made Ireland pay. Like that's a big thing in a game. Like that really that's very deflating when you've had big amounts of possession. You can't break the opposition down, and all of a sudden they go down. It's two passes and they're under the sticks. And remember they got pulled back for one. Now it was an obvious knock on, but there was all these moments where you kind of go, Jesus, like they get a sniff and they're away here, and that's kind of what happened. And I think Ireland will probably be disappointed with their defense. I thought that wasn't good at big moments either. France easily exposed them. There's the one, the kind of Bielbury chip through, like Henshaw. I mean, that's a bit of a moment of madness, isn't it? Kind of coming out of the line like that. The ball gets passed in behind, and it's Bielbury, so you're not going to catch him. I don't know. It felt like even the try when we were down to 14 in the first half was very, very soft. The one down the short side was a really, was it a 2-pass play, maybe 1-pass play once they kind of exposed Ireland's short side. So, yeah, I know there's lots for Ireland to be disappointed with. I don't think at the same time that they did themselves much justice. And the injuries pre-game really, really don't help. Like we haven't discussed that yet, but, the two wingers being out, they're kind of essential to Ireland's game plan. And I don't think we've got a genuine game breaker, like in terms of beating players like Lowe. Like he's our guy. Like, when Ireland are playing are kind of flat, he's a guy that can hand off someone, that can bump someone, that can do a chip, that can get an offload away, where other players in our team, I don't think can. Like he's our game breaker. So losing him was big. Furlong as well. Like, having a 1-2 punch of Bealham, Furlong, they're huge. I really think this really impacts this team, so lots there. I wish I could give you a straight answer, but I don't think there's one thing, guys. There's probably lots there, isn't there, that really caused when it's a scoreline that big, there's always going to be lots of things you say, oh, that wasn't right, or there was a big difference there, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about France kind of not having any particularly rash moments, and then I was thinking of Louis Bilbire, cross kicking it across his own line, and how, how unbelievably close that was to being, Peno being snagged, and yeah, and then Peno, if that ball doesn't bounce before going to touch, it would have been a line out back in on the 5 meter line, because it would have been, they had brought the ball back in. So that was a bit of a moment of madness that came out on the right side. But when on the day he was having, it's the kind of thing like, nothing was going to go wrong for him. And the point about you make about kind of France generally when they're in their full flow like that, you're kind of like, how do they ever lose? Like, you're like, how on earth did they lose to England? This England team who, against Italy at the weekend, it's being heralded as a new age. It's like it was 47-24 against Italy, who lost by like 50 to France the week before, and it's being heralded as the dawning of a new era of English rugby. But and the discipline, as you mentioned as well, is huge. And it's been a problem for Ireland, as you mentioned, though. So Ringrose gets that kind of red card against Wales. I think they won that period 15-0, was it, when Wales were a man up? Ireland lost 15-0 at the weekend when they were a man disadvantaged. So that's 30-0 they've lost across 2 matches with the man in the bin, and they were all very avoidable. Like, I'm kind of getting a bit fed up, Jonathan, with the notion of like, oh, it's all split second. Therefore, like, there's no onus on defenders to do anything. Like, yeah, Barassi does kind of lead towards with Nash with the head, but that one and the Ringrose one, yes, they are split second decisions, but players still need to be cognizant of the dangers of going into tackles like that. And the McCarthy one, like, I don't know what to say about that. Like, that's just a moment of mindless stupidity, really. Like, it's harsh to say maybe, but it's completely true. What he's hoping to achieve there, like, he really cost the team. Whatever about Nash, as I said, in a sticky situation defensively, like McCarthy doing that and then putting his team under the pump is inexcusable, really. But that's been a feature of Ireland's play, and it looked like they'd eradicated a bit from November, because November the penalty concessions were really, really high, and it wasn't so much for tackles and kind of moments like that from McCarthy. It was more general lazy indiscipline, whereas this was kind of big key moments. But across the season, the international season, you're talking about 6-7 games, it's been a major issue.
Even going back to South Africa as well, because they gave away loads and loads of penalties in that South African series too. But it's something that they definitely have to learn from. It's something that Joe McCarthy definitely has to learn from. He did media last week, and he was speaking about how Paul O'Connell had went to him and spoken to him about the penalty that he gave away at the end of the Wales game. And then I suppose to do something so mindless in such a key game, it's one of those things that you think if he doesn't learn from this, then he's not going to learn, because the consequences of this were so dire, and it has become, we talked about Prendergast last week and how his defence has become part of the narrative around him. Like with Joe McCarthy, it's the same thing, only the discipline has become part of the narrative around him. As good as a player as he is, and as much as Ireland need players like him and don't produce players of his physical abilities very often, you can't have that at test level. It's the kind of thing that would just be a red flag for selectors, that he's susceptible to these sorts of moments. So it's a huge thing that Ireland have to learn from. I think moving, obviously the summer's going to be so disrupted with players away with the line and whatnot, but moving into next year, we've got another 4 autumn games and another 6 nations. I think it's a huge work on to come away from, like you say, well, not just this 6 nations, but really, I suppose, the last 9 months of Ireland tests.
Yeah, Luke, because like Joe McCarthy undeniably is a real powerful ball carrier, especially against bigger teams like France, South Africa, at club level, say like a La Rochelle or a Toulouse. Like, he can match up and make his mark. But part of me sometimes thinks that, like, he's almost like playing the role of the second row enforcer and feels like he needs to do that, or, he wants to be involved in things like that. Like, a Bacchius boat back in the day where there wasn't half as much vigilance as there is now. And I just think I find it a massive frustration. Like, there's been loads of games where he's just racked up penalties. Nothing quite so obviously wrong as this. It's more so like kind of lazy, kind of lying on the ball, trying to like, slow the ruck ball down. And I feel like you don't need to do that. Like, those days are kind of over. You can't get away with much anymore. And it's just a frustration.
Yeah, well, sorry, it's always amazed me how... Yeah, I think, sorry, Will, you probably hear me every week on the show saying I'd have Ryan in my team straight away. It always amazes me how everyone's just moved on to McCarthy. I find it absolutely bizarre. Because yeah, as I said, you see me picking whenever we pick the teams, it's Ryan always is nearly my first name on the team sheet. So I find it weird. I think he's got a bit of a problem with it. I think he needs to get it sorted out. I recognize his abilities, and I think he's a lovely foil for whoever you pick alongside. You pick him alongside, but he'd be on my bench for me. Honestly, I think he'd be a really great impact player, but he wouldn't be in my starting team. So, not having a go around that, I could see his value, but I just think Ryan's better. So I'm kind of surprised at how that narrative is just kind of developed, and that he's just an automatic selection when he's fit. But yeah, like he needs to get that sorted out. Like I think Ireland, but I think Ireland generally, like there's been a little bit of moany stuff here and there about referees. Like that's, you just want to try and take them out of the equation as much as possible. I also thought there was a little bit of stuff with Doris on the weekend. I didn't think he really got the rub of the green with the ref. He didn't seem to manage that unbelievably well. So a few of these issues kind of coming back to. I just think there's a bit of an issue. I think the Ireland team could look at kind of sorting it out or having a discussion about it, because it has cost them, I think. They've been great so far. They're a very resilient team, and they've been great at kind of analysing themselves and coming back stronger. I think this is an area after this tournament that if I was the coaching staff, I'd be thinking, okay, let's have a look at this, and let's be really, really harsh on ourselves. And I expect them to get it resolved, but I hope that they recognise there's an issue.
Yeah, because and around the headshots, you can say all you want that it was unlucky and timing and was split second the last two matches, but Ireland were like world leaders in that area. I don't recall a single instance over the previous 2-3 years.
Well, you can control how you're coming in. Like there's no reason for you to be that high coming into any of those collisions. You don't need to be that high. And if you're lower, you're able to distribute power better, and you should be more in control of your body. I just think that's a anyone kind of explaining that to me in that way, I'm thinking it's a cop out, and it's just not being able to look at yourself in the cold light of day and say, well, how do I manage this better? How can I reduce the amount of these penalties, or the possibility that these collisions happen and they negatively impact the team? So the way you do that is you're in a low position. It means you can move laterally better. It means you're, as I said, more in control of your body. You're able to actually distribute more power because your legs are in a better position. I don't know. I don't get it. I think it's actually just poor technique, and I think they need to get it sorted out. Like even the Nash one, will, if he's just bent a little bit better, like that collision never happens. You know what I mean? Even though he's not engaging the guy, which is the reason he only got the yellow versus the red. You should just be in a better position, a little bit lower. If you're lower earlier, there's less chance of you being in a bad position at the end, or you'll get away with it. You know what I mean? The ref will say, "No, look, that's a rugby collision," because you can see how low he is already, and the other guy probably has to engage you in a lower position as well. You know, that kind of way. So yeah. I think it really mitigates the risk in the area, just being in a better position earlier. Just be lower earlier.
And I'm open to correction on this, but I think from Bundiaki's red card in the final game against England in the 2021 Six Nations until Ringrose's incident against Wales, I don't recall a high tackle yellow or red card. Definitely not a red. I don't even recall a yellow card. So unless there's something that I've completely missed, there's been, I know Doris got yellow card in South Africa for like going in at an angle at a ruck, but it wasn't. I'm talking specifically about high tackles. Ireland, as I said, were like world leaders in not picking up those kind of high shots and getting penalised for it. So to have two in a row, you're kind of thinking, I wonder, is that Andy Farrell's absence? Simon Easterby's usually the defence coach. Is it getting the attention it ordinarily would? You still wouldn't think it would cause that much of an issue, but 2 games in a row, it's proven very costly. Jonathan, the point Luke makes about Caelan Doris is an interesting one. We'd seen him have previous kind of interactions with, say, Luke Pearce in South Africa. We discussed that at length in this show and kind of debated it at the time. And there was this narrative that he was the captain and waiting for the Lions, that all of a sudden he had it all figured out. But, it just shows you, if you have a certain kind of referee and the relationship isn't good from the start, things can kind of go a little sideways.
Yeah, because it did seem to be very early on that the discussions between Doris and Gardner didn't seem to be going particularly well. He was obviously taking exception to the fact that Doris was approaching him during the TMO referrals, which is maybe something particular to Angus Gardner. It's not something that we've seen really for a while with Doris. We thought it was something that had been, discussed and then ironed out. So I thought it was a bit strange. I thought the conversations that were coming over the ref mic during the game even at the time, felt strange to me. Doris was asked about it afterwards and sort of just brushed it off. Didn't really think it was a big deal. Simon Easterby was asked about it. He didn't really think it was that big a deal. But it definitely seemed like from the start, like from very early on in the game, that it did not seem to be going smoothly between the two of them, which is interesting against, as you say, the backdrop of Doris being seen as the most obvious candidate for the Lions as well.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to watch just interactions and, as you say, picking it up on the ref mic, because like depending on the referee, they can be so totally different. And going in from the start of the game, the first couple of chats can really dictate a whole lot, because this was a game that was chock full of kind of flashpoints or controversial calls that could have gone either way. That would have required maybe a lot of referee management. Just to talk about two of those in particular, guys, and like. The clear out on Peter O'Mahony before that second French try, Luke, do you think that should have been chalked off? Or do you think like he was matadoring, or he went down too easily, as I've heard some people say, and that it was a fair score?
I think it probably should have been a pen, just by the letter of the law. I think if it went against you, you'd probably feel a little hard done by. But I think if you're going by the letter of the law, I think that one probably is a chalk off, isn't it? But tricky. It's tricky. I don't think it's not 100%. I don't think.
Yeah, and also, to be fair, France would have had a penalty for the high tackle anyway. So while it's easy to be like, oh, that try, it caused a try, France are probably going to the corner there with against 14 men. So in the round, while you can't guarantee they would have scored or anything, and they might have even kicked a 3-pointer, because France do go to the post maybe more than some other teams, they still would have had a penalty deep in Irish territory. So probably wasn't the most impactful penalty in the end, even though I do agree with you. I think it should have been disallowed, but it's probably within the realms of a judgment call that it's not a completely egregious one. And Jonathan, obviously the DuPont clear out became very controversial after the game, with Fabien Galtier's comments kind of pointing the finger, squarely at Byrne and Porter. He alleged they did a reprehensible act in deliberately targeting Antoine Dupont. And you'd be curious as to what footage Galtier had seen, because there certainly was one angle that I saw ITV show that looks like that they literally just drop onto his leg and it looks really bad. Whereas if you see a different angle, it does look much more like a complete accident, an unlucky collision, and that Dupont obviously suffering a serious injury is awful. But the whole thing, that whole from start to finish, was an awful incident. Like Dupont getting hurt, but then Galtier kind of, I thought, not covering himself in glory either in the post-match.
No, I don't think so either. I think there's given the inevitability of injuries in rugby and the inevitability of accidental injuries, I think there is a duty on head coaches and people when doing these interviews to not essentially accuse other players of intentionally injuring somebody when there's no proof that was the case. I think looking at the incident, it looks to me like it was accidental. I don't think the thing that really confused me was the fact that the anger was split evenly between Byrne and Porter, because if you're pointing the finger at Porter, then I don't know what you can possibly think Byrne could have done, because if you're blaming Porter for pushing Byrne, then what can Byrne possibly have done? Like, somebody hits him from behind and he falls into the knee. It's not I don't think there was any sort of intent from Byrne at all. I understand the emotion of the situation. You could even see it during the game with Aldert talking to Angus Gardner, again picked up on the ref mic, of saying something along the lines of, he's done his ACL here. And Angus Gardner saying, yep, look, we're all upset about that. That's bad for the game, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there was any intent there. And I think I would say it's irresponsible to come out and call other players reprehensible, for a head coach to come out and call players reprehensible when there was no proof that was the case, and it didn't even really look like that was the case.
That was it. For me, it was just so inaccurate as well as being inappropriate. I just thought it was wrong when you see the full angles to accuse him of that. If he wanted to say it in a softer way in the heat of the moment, maybe, but they used the word reprehensible. I think that the lad's reputations took a massive hit, certainly in France, because you know, will people really care that, oh, they were technically exonerated? I'm sure they'll probably go with their head coach and what he said. And like, I think we'd be saying the same if the roles reversed and say Simon Easterby had said it. Like it looks, as you say, Jonathan, Porter goes into Byrne, who goes into DuPont. Like it looks like an accident. Luke, what was your perspective on that whole thing? Galtier, DuPont, the lads going in.
Yeah, I just say an emotional head coach. Probably should have avoided commenting on it. He's just lost, his best player, one of the best players nearly that might ever play the game, I'd say. So there's a big amount of emotion involved. Looked to me like a pure rugby collision. So yeah, nothing further to add on that one, except that it was kind of silly comments from a guy who's very, very experienced in Galtier in front of the media, for years and years and years. As a player too, and as a captain of France as well. I thought it was really unusual, bit weird actually, questioning the guys. Whether they were kind of dirty players. And like, neither of those players are actually dirty guys anyway. They actually play very clean, and they're just really, really good rugby players. So, you would hope that it won't damage their kind of reputations in France. In Ireland, I think everyone was very clear about, what kind of collision it was. So I'm on the same page as that. I just thought it, glad they were exonerated. It was just an awkward one. That was all.
Yeah, and hopefully DuPont isn't out for too long. Obviously, it's an ACL injury, which can be quite lengthy, but as Dan Sheehan showed, sometimes if certain things bounce your way, you can maybe get back sooner than you'd think. So hopefully for at least maybe the start of next season or come the November internationals, he can be back in action. Guys, there's still a load of things I want to get to. One player I actually want to give a little kudos to from France, who is probably a good bit down the team sheet in terms of star power or names you might look to, but I think he's such a key guy in the team because he allows other players to maybe do other things that are a little more eye-catching, and that's Francois Crust, the flanker, who's such a phenomenal defender, so aggressive. And I was looking earlier, only 2 players have started all 4 of Toulouse's top 14 wins in the last 4 years in the final. The 2 Toulouse Champions Cup wins, the Grand Slam campaign of 2022, and this year's campaign, which looks like it might yield another 6 Nations, and that's Antoine Dupont and Francois Crust. So he's been an ever-present in this, certainly a bountiful era for Toulouse, and it looks like maybe a second 6 Nations title, and he's just part of that really, rearguard effort for France in the opening exchanges. It's funny, he wears like an identical scrum cap to Aldred, so sometimes it can be kind of confusing as to who's doing what, but he definitely pulls his own weight, and to be an ever-present in 2 really successful teams, I think, I just wanted to give him a shout out. But I digress. I wanted to talk about the attack as well, guys. Like, Luke, what did you see in the first 20 minutes when Ireland were all over France, camped in the 22, coming away with 0 points? Obviously, Jonathan mentioned hitting the post from a penalty, but there was a lot of other instances where France forced a turnover, Ireland were held up, Sam Prendergast lost the ball in contact. Like, what did you make of the Ireland attack? Was it just a case of, missing, as you say, a James Lowe, a Mac Hansen to pick that lock? Because it did look like Ireland were struggling and could have been there for a while and they still might not have scored.
Yeah, anytime they went wide, I mean, if you think about some of the good positions Ireland got themselves in, Will, like the wide defence from the French players was brilliant, wasn't it? There was a few massive hits, but Ireland didn't seem to have someone who could put on a bit of footwork or just get that last pass away. They were all, I just thought, like, credit to the French team for that too. I thought their quality of their tackling was brilliant. I think as well, there was key moments where I thought Ireland's body height, I kind of alluded to it in the first point I made when we were talking about the game. I thought at key points their body height wasn't great at ruck, or their technique wasn't great around the ruck. Sometimes I think when Ireland are playing at their best, their forwards are kind of ball playing nicely, and they're kind of getting gain lines, but also, and they were doing some of that, some of the picking and going was good, but when it got into the later phase, when they got a little bit tired, I thought they lost their body height a little bit and lost a few kind of key battles at key moments. And they're probably my 2 takeaways on it. Again, I think yes, I think Ireland would have been better with different personnel. But that wasn't just an attack, particularly, Mac Hansen. I thought they missed his defence. I never thought I'd say that when he first burst on the scene, but Nash looked like he struggled. He was out of position a few times, caught in no man's land. I think Mac Hansen's actually very tidy there now, but also he's very good in attack, and he's another pair of hands for them as well. He's the guy who can get away a really top quality pass under pressure. So, and as you said, the low factor where you can just beat a guy. I just think Ireland looked like they were probably lacking someone who could just beat someone. They were probably missing a Gary Ringrose too, is probably fair to say. So yeah, no, just there's a few factors, isn't there? Just a few guys that you kind of wish were on the pitch that make a big difference to Ireland being able to break a team down, and that's probably why I thought they looked a little bit flat and couldn't get over the last little. Once France had nearly 15 men in the front line, I thought they looked quite comfortable. I don't know about you guys. I just think Ireland didn't look like they kind of nearly ran out of ideas or just didn't have the extra firepower and accuracy on the day to get the job done. So I think big credit to Sean Edwards in the defence. I thought they did a great job, but you would wonder if Ireland had a few of those bodies, would it have been a different day with the start they had?
Yeah, taking out your two wingers and your outside centre from a back line, you're not going to be as potent. And Ireland do not have the depth, as you said. Like, no one would have said going into the game. Obviously, Lowe only pulled out on the day. Like, if you knew your wingers were Osborne and Nash, you wouldn't have expected Ireland to make hay, with that back line. I don't think, as good as those guys are, when you're coming up against a back line of France's calibre, I think it's a different level, really. Jonathan, it's funny because, like, I've seen a lot of people talk about this defeat in kind of like an existential way, that like, oh, this proves that Ireland are, they don't have the power, don't have the pace that France have. And like, for me, it's very reductive to say, oh, Ireland need more pace in their team. Obviously, it would be great if Ireland had a Louis Bielbiere and a Damien Penaud or guys with that pace. But I feel like Ireland have already proven that they can win at the highest level with the kind of athletes they do have. So, for me, it's not obviously, if there's a project put in place to widen the playing base and get different kind of athletes in, that would be great. But I don't necessarily look at the defeat, as bad as it was, and think, oh, Ireland are kind of not at the top table anymore, or can't compete with France. Like Luke mentioned it there, Ireland were missing like 5 key players. Getting a few of those guys back would make a massive difference. I still think this Ireland team is built to compete and win and beat the best teams in the world. Am I being naive in that assessment after what we saw on Saturday?
No, I don't think so. I think the nature of the injuries and when the injuries occurred meant that it wasn't as big a part of the narrative as it otherwise would have been. Like, we all remember the quarterfinal in 2015, whenever Ireland were missing 5 players, and how that became the dominant theme through the week of how Ireland's depth was going to be tested. But because nobody really knew about Hansen being out until the Thursday, because Lowe pulled out in the warm-up, Gary Ringrose was obviously a suspension. Furlong has been, Ireland have been optimistic that Furlong's going to play the last, 7 games at this point, 8 games, without ever really ruling him out. So it wasn't really viewed as Ireland had this big test of depth coming into the game. That's how it transpired. I do think there is somewhat of a concern given how their games against the other best teams in the world have gone recently. If you go back, if we take South Africa, France, New Zealand as the rest of the best teams in the world, then Ireland lost the first test in South Africa where they were dominated physically. They were a drop goal away, a last second drop goal away from losing both games in that series. They were decidedly second best against the All Blacks, and now have been decidedly second best against France. So I suppose there is somewhat of a narrative emerging that Ireland are not punching above or punching down, I suppose, whenever they're playing very well, and are not in these real heavyweight contests looking like they are on the same level as the teams that we view as the other best teams in the world. So I think recent results plays into that sort of existential thing that you're talking about. And also, just as we talked about earlier, how second best Ireland were through that half hour, because it's been a really long time since Ireland have looked so off the pace and so second best to anyone. You're probably going back, I would think, to maybe the 2019 Six Nations, really. That first game against England,
but
for a time when Ireland looked so off it.
It's funny though, Jonathan, because like I mentioned the 2022 first test against the All Blacks as an example of a team getting a run on Ireland and racking up the points. And Like Ireland then won the next two games, and like I do think if Ireland played again this weekend against France, and the update is allegedly Tyke Furlong's fit, which means he definitely won't play, and Matt Hansen is going to be back, and Gary Ringrose is going to be back. Like I don't think if Ireland played again, say if it was a Test series this weekend, I wouldn't expect Ireland to get blown out. So maybe I am naive. I still think the team, as currently constituted, can beat France. Like, obviously, they got a hiding on Saturday, the third quarter. France really turned up the power. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm saying naive a lot, but maybe I sound like a kind of I can't see the wood from the trees here. But what do you think?
No, I don't think so. I think this is an excellent Ireland team, and I think they're just going through a bit of a patch of.
Like, I don't think it's the end of the line. I feel like there's a narrative that this could be like the end of the.
Rubbish talk. That's people. That's people panicking looking at that result. Like, even think about, like, it's nearly a 14-point swing with the last intercept as well, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, I know. Look, they're not over the line. They had struggled to get over the line for most of the game, but like he gives that pass to Ramos, Prendergast, and Pinot runs it in, but like that's 5 meters from their line. That could easily be a try for Ireland. And then you're kind of going, okay, well, it's not a complete mess. Do you know what I mean? It's not a 30-point blowout. It's more like a 25 or 20, so something like that, So there's a bit of color there as well. And I think with the big numbers, people do get a bit panicky about it and maybe overread things. I think the injuries played a massive part in it. I think that's completely fair to say. I do think Ireland have some issues that they need to resolve. Like, I think we've kind of gone through them. No point in running back over that kind of old ground. But other than that, I think this team is in a good place to compete. I think you'd rather that they, that we didn't have to be kind of making up excuses. But I think there are some pretty good excuses there for why Ireland kind of haven't performed in some of those games. I think, on their day, they're still very capable of kind of beating any of those teams. But, I'm more putting this down to a bad day at the office for us combined with a good day at the office for the French. And that's kind of where I've squared this. Like, this wasn't really the end of the team for me. If anything, I think there's really good potential in taking this team forward. There definitely will have to be a new kind of core of guys coming through. There's a few guys over the next couple of years who are a little bit older. So there's 3 very senior people leaving the team after this Six Nations. So yes, there will be a little bit of turnover, but it seems like kind of natural turnover. And in some of the key areas, you've got some very good young talent, much as we were given, or I was given McCarthy a little bit of stick. He's a young guy. Sheehan is a pretty young guy still. You got some brilliant world-class players. Porter isn't that old. He's obviously a lot of miles on the clock. But then you look at the out-half situation, probably the most difficult position in rugby to really get someone great. And we've got 2 really good up-and-comers there. So this is not the end for this Ireland team. Even though they will have to deal with some changeover. And I think they're in a good place. I like lots of the growth. I think we saw some really good stuff. I thought they were good. The forwards looked like they were back, with that kind of interplay. I thought that was really, really good. I thought at times the rucking was brilliant. It was brilliant against Scotland. And I think they have at times looked like they were able to break teams open and get tries from kind of, different parts of the pitch. Now, a lot of that kind of revolved around low, but they finished them very well. They were things that we kind of been complaining about, hasn't it? We like the team had looked a little toothless, looked a little bit lost, looked like they hadn't been breaking teams down as well. I think I've seen some of that in the competition, but the problem is a few other areas have kind of crept in where you're kind of saying, okay, that's an issue they've got to resolve now. And look, most teams have to deal with that all the time. So I'm not unbelievably surprised. I think it was just a bad day at the office on the weekend, and that's what I'm putting it down to.
Yeah, like my point isn't that like this Ireland team are the best team in the Six Nations or should have won on Saturday. France were worthy winners. As I said at the top of the show, they came needing the win to kind of save the credibility of this project, and they 100% delivered that. They are now the best team in Europe, on course to win the Six Nations. Their club game is going great guns. It's just that, and there's been times when we've come in after like World Cup quarterfinals, say, and you're kind of, oh, where do Ireland go from here? And you have that kind of a conversation. And I'm merely saying that I'm not there. I think that was a bad defeat and a bad second half performance against a team who were playing really well. And I think in the medium term to short term, the quality in this team holds. And I expect them come November against New Zealand and against South Africa to give good accounts of themselves and to possibly win. Like the most recent games against the best teams in the world, like the New Zealand one was probably the worst Ireland performance in 5 years. Remember the handling errors, the discipline. That one was almost a complete outlier. Like Ireland played far better at the weekend than they did against the All Blacks. The 45 minutes they played against France were good. Like, they didn't take their chances, which is obviously disappointing. And that's been a part of a kind of a recurring theme, which is one of the issues that Luke touched on there that they will need to stamp out. But I still think that the team is in an okay place. But I suppose time will tell on that. Jonathan, the out half situation, like Luke mentioned it there, it's still getting a lot of, intrigue and publicity and attracting controversy, I guess, in some circumstances. Like, what did you make of Sam Prendergast's performance? And now that we're kind of coming to the tail end of the Six Nations, like, how do you reflect on how this has been managed? Just kind of what started as a battle, or so we thought, which ended up kind of as a coronation in terms of Sam Prendergast playing almost every meaningful minute outside of the England game.
Yeah, I think that's probably been something that maybe looked at now as a missed opportunity, that they didn't get Jack Crowley more minutes at 10. The minutes that we did see him play at 10, he played very well, but we then didn't see it thereafter. I didn't think Prendergast had his best game by any means on Saturday. I thought it was a difficult game for him. It was France were doing really, really well to ensure that he was playing off bad ball. Gibson Park obviously didn't have his best game either, which wouldn't have helped Prendergast. But to me, and I know that some people have watched that game and been like, oh, well, Prendergast was the problem. For me, like, Prendergast was at a similar level to an awful lot of other players who were below par across the piece, but obviously most definitely in terms of Ireland's attack, whenever they did have that dominance and couldn't turn it into points. So I don't think that this game says anything about Sam Prendergast moving forward. I think the one thing that we have seen from Prendergast is that he isn't rattled in the same way that you might expect other young players to be. So would be no doubt in my mind that he will use this and process this the right way and be better for it in the medium term and possibly even short term. But I do think that now the championship's gone, now that Ireland haven't been able to make that signature piece of history that they really were seeking with the 3 wins in a row, that developmentally for the team, we may look on it and think that we would have been better off seeing more of Jack Crowley at 10. Not necessarily from the start, but more throughout the tournament as we did in that England game.
Yeah, Lucas, that's where I'm at. I thought the 1-2 punch against England, I thought served the team very well, because two guys are very different players. Jack Crowley has a bit more physicality, a bit more robust carrying the ball, definitely more robust defensively. Just like throwing a different picture at a team. Like, basically after that first game against England, where I think it was basically like 58 minutes for Prendergast and Crowley saw it out for the remainder. Like, it was just Sam Prendergast, Sam Prendergast, Sam Prendergast, Sam Prendergast, Sam Prendergast. So, like, I would have thought that, like, by the time France came to town, they would have known with 2 break weeks either side of a match, they would have had to be able to pour over the footage and they would know what Sam Prendergast likes to do. I don't feel like Ireland would they have benefited from throwing a different picture at teams? Because I'm just surprised that the 1-2 punch worked so well in the first game and was never revisited. As in, they played a little bit together, obviously, but I mean, like, swapping them in and out half for each other. Like, what's your perspective on that?
Would you say it was a good 1-2 punch in the first game, or would you say Crowley just played very good when he came on?
Well, whatever way you want to shake it. Sorry, like, if that's it.
So look, if you're asking me what team, and you probably knew this, Will, before we started the competition. Like, I knew they were going to pick Prendergast, right? But if you had asked me who I would have picked and how I would have done it, I would have had Crowley starting the games, and I would have had Prendergast coming off the bench. That's how I would do it. I thought that one made more sense in terms of where the players are in their journeys. Seems like a bit of a fast track to me for Prendergast. I think, I think, look, you can see the quality of the guy. You can see he's going to be a great player, but he plays in a team that's kind of pumping every other pack nearly every week, unless they come up against Toulouse or La Rochelle. So, and that's a very different picture to what's going on with Crowley then in Munster. Like, that's a very different day, week to week, that he has. So it's very difficult to kind of judge Crowley, on that. Unfortunately, we have to, and that's going to be something that he's going to have to shoulder and be better at. I thought he got better after November. I thought he played well for Munster. But he needs to just be super solid for me. And he, look, at the moment, if you ask me honestly, if I was picking the team, who I'd pick, it would be Crowley. It would be Crowley would be my starting 10. It would have been my starting 10 before the competition started. And I would have said, great, let's see what Prendergast can do in the last 20. Maybe to open up the game. He seems like he's more that kind of player, Will. You know, he's got the kind of expansive game plan. He's got the lovely hands. He can put people through gaps. When teams are tired, that felt like it would have suited. And also probably harder to game plan for him while he's still growing into his body. You know, I think what's come out of this now is that for playing Ireland, you can, run at the 10. You're going to get, easy gain lines, or he'll miss a few tackles. And I think he can kind of be, I don't know. I thought like France are one of the really good teams. I think South Africa or New Zealand would also game plan very well for him. I think he's kind of easy to game plan at this stage in his career for. And I just, I don't know. I don't know if that's. I feel really harsh saying that because he's a very young guy in a really difficult job that he's doing. But to me, he just doesn't look ready. You know, that kind of way. Like you see, he has these moments of skill where I say, wow, you can see the potential, the big spiral kicks, the lovely passes, the delayed, the delays before he puts someone through a hole. You can see all the ability, but he just looks like a bag of bones out there. And against the big teams, like you saw that on the weekend. You saw what France did to him. I thought they bullied him, and I thought Wales bullied him. And that's not to say that the guy won't be ready. He just looks like it's a little early for me to be starting him in the Six Nations. This was always going to be a massive, massive challenge for him. And I think Crowley's further in the journey, and I'd be more comfortable with him at 10. But that's my opinion. I don't think many people share that. I think many people, most people think that it's okay for the team to have kind of suffered a little bit because in the longer term, we gain more. And that may well be the case, but that's not how I feel about it. As I hope I've explained okay there.
No, I thought that was a really good explanation because the reason I was framing it as a 1-2 punch with Crowley coming in was purely because that's how it was so obviously going to be picked. And it goes back to the November decision, which was kind of out of the blue. And Jonathan, I must say, we've discussed it before, but now that the Six Nations is gone, almost barring a miracle, we can kind of reflect on it as a whole. I do find it perplexing and baffling his Sam Prendergast ascension, both at club level and at international level, in the sense that, Kieran Frawley had started the season at Leinster and was the incumbent, and then Prendergast got the nod in November, and then kind of Frawley was kicked out of both club and country after the New Zealand performance. And while I agree with Luke, I think Luke has actually been spot on there in the sense that there's a couple of moments you see and you're like, wow, that's serious quality. Like some of his line kicking is brilliant. Some of his lengthy goal kicking is brilliant. But there's been inconsistency off the tee as well. And while he's had some unbelievable spiral kicks, we saw against Wales, then shanking the next one and the team almost conceding a try. It's been a very mixed Six Nations for me. And while he is young, I'm going to speak about him and judge him like a starting international out half for one of the best teams in the world, because that's what he is. I think that's what is fair for the team, because Ireland were going for 3 Six Nations in a row, and I still am convinced that that they didn't take a massive risk in kind of trying to manage a project with winning the Six Nations. It does seem to me like when Rudd was on after the Wales game, I said, I felt like they left him on against Wales for the project, and it was at risk of the actual result. And Rudd disagreed, said, they thought he was the best guy to win the game. But I still am convinced that's the case. I still think that they were trying to straddle two things here, and I don't think it's worked in the end.
Well, I suppose it hasn't worked in the end because Jack Crowley won a Six Nations last year and Sam Prendergast hasn't this year. But you have to look at it, I suppose, one, as the team. There's always going to be this focus on the 10, regardless of who's playing. But I wouldn't be convinced that they would have won on Saturday with Jack Crowley starting rather than Sam Prendergast. I think that focus is too much in on Sam Prendergast's role in the defeat rather than all the other factors that we've talked about. I do think that once they backed Prendergast to start against Australia, that was the beginning of this. I don't think there was any point in then reverting or going Prendergast Crowley. I think the point that you make, Will, that I find interesting is the lack of using Jack Crowley as a plan B during games. We'll never know, I suppose, whether they would have taken Prendergast off very early, comparatively speaking, against France, had they not gone 6-2 and had Bondiaki not look like he'd been carrying an injury for quite a while, because I think that would have been very interesting, because France looked so comfortable to me defensively in a way that they were playing against Ireland, and in a way that we may well associate with the Sean Edwards defence, but it's not necessarily the way they had been defending in recent weeks, which to me made me think that France had game planned for this Ireland attack, and game planned brilliantly for this Ireland attack, but looked so comfortable in negating it that under any normal circumstances, I would have been very keen to see them change that picture very early on.
I would actually say that. So one thing in Crowley's defense here, right? Like, I do think, so the defense we've kind of used here for Prendergast, and actually a very valid point, right, is that, there's other factors at play here. It wasn't just all down to him, that Ireland didn't play well. And I actually completely agree with that, and that's often the case for halfbacks, you know what I mean? Like, if you're getting, I mentioned the body height at ruck time, all those kind of things, the accuracy there, all those things do impact how your 9 and 10 kind of end up playing, because it's kind of the pictures that they end up having. Are they having momentum? Are they going forward or backwards? Whatever, all those things, right? But I'd probably apply the same logic to how Crowley got dropped in November to that. Do you know that kind of way? Like, I don't think the team was playing as well then. I don't think certainly the attack wasn't firing. I didn't think the forwards had pretty much any interplay amongst themselves, which had been the hallmark, or one of the big differences between Ireland and the other teams in those kind of, even the other three top teams, bar maybe New Zealand have some quality, but even they, I thought, were behind Ireland in that respect. And I thought those things were all well below par when Crowley had his bit of dip. Now, he had a bit of a dip anyway in his own performances in some respects too, but I think it's probably Prendergast now might be in the same situation that Crowley found himself in, and I don't think that he's going to get treated the same, which I just think is a little bit odd. But look, it's certainly a very interesting debate. You'd never want to absolutely crucify a young fella like that after a game like that. He's had a tough day at the office. I mean, some of the chips I didn't love Jonathan either. I just thought there's some of them kind of they were a little bit rash at times, and Ireland were in good positions. He looked like a young guy out there, I thought, in a kind of and that's completely fine, because that's what he is. And I do think he gets better and better. But I also felt like I just don't like that it hasn't sat that well with me how Crowley's been treated on a serious note. It just hasn't sat that well. I didn't like how Andy Farrell talked about him, kind of in a different, like, it was almost like he was judging two players in the same position very, very, like, by very different standards, and that just hasn't sat well with me. And the other thing I'd say is, it feels to me like training has really dictated who they're going to be selecting here, and training's non-contact. Like, do you know what I mean? It's non-contact. So, like, the amount of guys, like, I know guys with 100 caps who I remember playing against the guy, unbelievable player, and always we had, like, the feeling, in my club was that, yeah, but when it comes to the contact, he's a very different player. He looks unbelievable in training, but when it comes to the games, he's not the same. And that's something that you have to keep in mind, because it seems like training has been a big factor in how they're selecting this. To me, do you guys have that feeling at all as well?
It's 100% the factor, because when he was first picked in November, he'd barely played for Leinster. He hadn't played, as I said, his first big appearance for Leinster came after he was picked for Ireland. So it's strictly on training, and you hear that a lot. How he runs the week, how he matches himself at training, because we had the conversation at the time, like, it wasn't based on what he'd done in matches, like, because the body of work just wasn't there to justify his ascension so quickly. And I'm still not convinced that it justifies, like, cause I don't agree with the notion that, you can't be chopping and changing, or it wouldn't be beneficial to the team if they're chopping and changing. Like, if Sam Prendergast isn't playing well enough to hold on to the starting jersey, they should make a change to Jack Crowley. I don't think it's, like, so detrimental to the team. I think that, like, if one guy's playing better than the other, or one guy isn't playing unbelievably well, you do change. I think you should change the out half. I know it's a position that you ideally want a lot of security and consistency in, but not to the detriment of everything else, or ignoring everything else. Not that he was, like, so bad or anything, because he had some really good moments, but he had some, wobbly moments as well. And just the fact that, like, Crowley disappeared from the reckoning after arguably his best 20 minutes for Ireland, kind of, because kind of
feel right.
It
didn't feel right at all.
I'm not surprised that people have wild conspiracy theories about this, because I haven't seen a selection develop like this before. So while I don't agree with people making social media criticism of the two guys, it's not fair on the lads. At the same time, I'm sitting here myself thinking, geez, that's a bit of a head scratcher. You know, that perplexes me. And I've watched a lot of rugby and I follow team selections pretty closely, Jonathan. Like, it is strange. Let's say strange is the wrong word. It's unusual.
It is unusual. I think maybe one thing that we haven't talked about yet is remembering how shaky Crowley's form was for Munster up until January. He really came back into form in Munster only in the Champions Cup games, which would have been the last block of games before the Six Nations.
He was good up in Belfast, wasn't he? Was he good in Belfast in December as well? I thought he was kind of turning it December, no?
It was okay. Like, they won, but it wasn't like return to form. It was the Northampton game where he really was back to his best.
Sorry to interrupt, Sean. Yeah, but I just felt like he was playing a little bit like... I thought he kind of came back from November kind of playing pretty good, no? Like, not straight away, but... Anyway.
Yeah, I think he built into it, and then really in those Champions Cup games was where he looked a lot more like himself. And I would wonder, like, if we go back, say, over the past 10, 12 years, it didn't really feel like provincial form was being taken into consideration in international selection to a great degree under Joe Schmidt. That's maybe changed a little bit over the last couple of years, possibly. I don't know whether we think the way that Crowley started the season at Munster and the way that in and around Graham Roundtree's departure would have played a big part in the way that Andy Farrell was thinking in November, and then whether his improved run of form just came a little bit too late to change their mind. I'm very wary of the fact that, like, whenever we were talking about this like a month ago, like, I thought Sam Prendergast was going to start and didn't have any issue with that. And to be honest, I don't know how much, beyond the fact that he's the number 10, I don't know how much stock I would put in Prendergast's form over an awful lot of the other players' form that we've seen in, certainly on Saturday. But like we talked about this last week as well, like, you know, Ireland weren't particularly impressive in the first half against England. They weren't particularly impressive for a good chunk of that game against Wales. So it's been a very uneven Six Nations. I think Prendergast, as I would expect him to, has had an uneven Six Nations with both some really good moments and some not so good moments. But there's an awful lot of players in that boat, and an awful lot of them have vastly more international experience than Sam Prendergast does.
Jonathan,
but I think the point was that Jack Crowley hasn't really had an up and down. That, like, I think that's been what, like, he's played well coming into the competition. Every chance he's got, like, it was kind of like he was brilliant when he came off the bench against England. That's kind of the point. That doesn't seem to be forming part of the narrative for me. It's not just about Prendergast. It's like Crowley is actually playing well. He's not playing up and down. He doesn't have. He's only kind of had mostly pretty much good moments, and Prendergast has had some bad moments that just seem to be, oh, well, that's kind of brushed to the side. It doesn't seem to form part of the equation when you're kind of, you know, when you're comparing the two guys. You know, it's just like, well, that's, you know, it's only upside with him, but whereas Crowley, it's like, well, you know, it's everything seems to be forming part of the decision to select him. You know, so
yeah, I think he's been unfortunate because. I think he's been unfortunate in terms of playing 10, because I think the Scotland game was won. I think the fact that Ireland don't think that they have a nailed-on alternative to Hugo Keenan at fullback worked against them. So I think there was a desire to see Crowley at fullback against Scotland whenever he much would have rather...
Yeah, it causes a problem, doesn't it, Jonathan, if on the bench for you? Like, if Prendergast's on your bench, you've kind of no choice. And I suppose you could put Crowley back, but like, do you want to be the person who's been in the pocket for 60 minutes? Do you want to say, oh God, let's move him out if he's playing well? Yeah, you probably really don't want to do that. But yeah, sorry.
Against Scotland, the fear of another backline injury whenever Ringo's had the red card worked against him in coming on to play 10 against Wales. And then, as we had flagged last week, it was very unlikely that he was ever going to come on and play 10 with the 6-2 split, especially the way that then the injuries went prior to kickoff, you know?
Yeah. Those are good points,
Yeah, no, it is. It's certainly an interesting debate, and there's plenty of club action over the next couple of weeks. Sorry, notwithstanding that we have Italy this weekend, actually. Sorry, I've already kind of bypassed the last weekend.
I am kind of conscious of that myself. I'm like,
I was switching back to URC mode.
Yeah.
I'm ready for the URC, to embrace the warm bosom of the URC and get back to club duty. Okay, we'll just quickly finish off on Italy then, Jonathan, just in terms of like what kind of team would you like to see picked this weekend? Like, would you like to see, like, will the three players get one last hurrah? Would you like to see them just kind of lean into some of the younger players in the squad? Or, you know, ultimately they could still win the Six Nations. It does seem unlikely, but if England don't get a bonus point win in Wales, and if Scotland go and produce some magical performance with you know, which is unlikely, but you never know. Like, so the kind of, it's interesting to see what they might do.
Yeah, I think they have to treat this as a game where a Six Nations title remains on the line, because you're never going to look sillier than if you don't treat it that way, and then it turns out that the other results go your way.
Oh, if England win the Six Nations, Jonathan, oh God, I'm packing this job in.
So, but I am curious about the selection in general, especially if James Lowe isn't fit, because Jamie Osborne, sort of similar in the way that we're talking about Crowley. Like, I don't think they're doing him any favours by having the fullback, right wing, left wing. Like, to me, like, Jacob Stockdale is a better test left winger than Jamie Osborne. So I understand that the injuries were obviously very late in the piece with James Lowe, but you know, the desire to get Jamie Osborne in there whenever realistically he's a centre, you know. So I'd be interested to see what way they go if Lowe's not fit. Hansen, you would expect to come straight back in. Obviously, like, Furlong coming straight back in with 2 months without any rugby is going to be interesting to watch. But I would keep the changes to the changes that you would be making, as if this is a title decider, you know?
Yeah, because as you said, nothing will be worse than Ireland slipping up and then France losing later in the day and still winning the Six Nations, or maybe England sneaking in as well. Luke, I'll give you the last word then. You know, anything you want to add to the Italy game, anything you want to see? Like, it goes without saying that anything other than a kind of a good performance and a win would be pretty disastrous. But anyone you'd like to see feature in particular?
I'll bring Ryan back in. I might actually go a little controversial here and go Conan at 8, Doris to 6. I think Conan's been on fire. I think he's been absolutely on fire. I'd love to see him get a bit more game time. And I'd go with Crowley. And I agree on the Osborne one. I hadn't thought about that, but I think they need to. He's a centre full. He was very good against Wales for large periods. I thought he's an excellent fullback, isn't he? I think he's a really, really excellent fullback. But the wing is very difficult defensively for him. I think it's a big step up there on like. I think it's the hardest place to defend in the back line, because you got the kicking element, but also the big connection between you and the second centre, and you're also tackling all the hardest people. It's a really difficult place to learn, and like, you see how badly Nash got exposed. You see when Henshaw's at the end of the line, like one of the best defenders Ireland have ever had. Difficult place to defend, guys. So I think it's tough to ask someone to step in there. Like, it's very nuanced, you know. And look, Stockdale's had his issues there, but as a pure finisher, and, you know, if you need points on the board, like, Stockdale to me it actually might be a good call to bring someone like him if Lowe's not fit. So there, a few things that I think maybe I would do if I was selecting the squad. But, you know, pick your best 23. Jonathan's absolutely right. You got to finish the competition right, and you can't take Italy lightly. I think they've got to try and play a reasonably tight game to start. They've got to try and break this Italian team down. They're very capable of doing that. And then unloading the power off the bench, or Bairds, these guys who are playing. McCarthy be coming off the bench for me. That power. Yeah, Kelleher, is that a big long-term one? I didn't actually check on that.
No, I don't think long-term.
He said that he was being monitored again, so.
Is he? Well, if he gets back in, you just think about that power you're bringing off the bench, guys, you know. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. I think Ireland still have a great bench, even if Conan's starting. You couldn't have a Mahoney coming on, these guys. So, yeah, whoever you pick there, you know, I think we go full bore and just respect them. You need to respect them at the start to build a big score up. I think that's the way you do. You see, like how England did it. Like most of the real damage was done second half. They just ran away, but the others ran out of steam, and that's how you break them down and put a big score on them. We can't do a France on it where for 80 minutes they just kind of pick them apart with kind of moments of magic. I don't think that's us, but we could definitely do what England did, and I think do it better. So there's still a big score there, and you need to respect them.
Yeah, well, even though I'd almost forgotten the game existed 2 seconds ago, it's actually not a bad Saturday rugby. Of Ireland, Italy, Wales, England in the Millennium under the roof. They'll be G'd up to finally get a win, and then France, Scotland. Who knows what could happen? It'll be the most French thing ever to collapse against England, hammer Ireland. Oh, Fabien Galtier is great, and then he's resigning in disgrace on Saturday night because they've lost it on to Scotland.
Scotland haven't had their one kind of weird, funky game yet. Have they not? They usually have one weird one, don't they?
They nearly had it on Saturday, but
yeah. So look,
yeah, fair enough.
Look, stranger things have happened. Who knows what we'll be coming into to chat about next Tuesday? But for now, Luke, Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me.